Fade in.
Welcome to the place to be reviews.
Hello, welcome back to the channel. Yes, Prodigal Son is back for 1 week. It's the mid-season finale, the winter finale, if you will. Season 2, Episode 7, Face Value. Let's get into this review. Was it a good episode? Did I enjoy it? We'll talk about that at the end of the video. You know what time it is. Monkeys, roll the footage. Fade in. No, I'm just kidding. We start out our episode in Quantico, Virginia, 2015, the FBI Academy. Bright is speaking in front of an FBI training class. He has a flashback of his conversation with Ainsley the night she was covered in blood, and she said she killed someone else and blacked out and couldn't remember anything. But like I said, this is a dream sequence. Then we switch over to Martin, who calls Malcolm on the phone to gloat about getting a new job, having a sense of purpose within the confines of Claremont Psychiatric. He's going to work in the infirmary. Malcolm says great, promptly hangs up on him and tends to Ainsley, who is staying with him. Bright gets the phone call and has to go and deal with a homicide. He meets Danny and JT and Idrissa, who is already examining the scene. Bright has a little funny kind of back and forth with Idrissa. And then we see this woman in a chair who has basically been Botoxed to death, and it looks like a melted 1980s cartoon dog, or kind of Cardi B, if you will. The next scene, we're introduced to Jessica's sister, Birdie, or something like that her name is. I couldn't really hear, and I wasn't really that interested in the character because she literally added nothing to the show, and she's kind of a pretentious pain in the ass. But, I mean, she's meant to be like a more amped up version of Jessica, but you get the feeling that she needs something, and it turns out, yes, she does. We'll find out more later on about her, but not too much, and it really doesn't make much sense to why we're just now 2.5 seasons in finding out that Jessica has a sister. Why does this happen? Don't know. The plot needs it to, that's why. This next scene sees us introduced to our second new character of the episode and the series. Martin is making his way into the infirmary, and we're introduced to Dr. Capshaw, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, who looks a little bit like Cardi B's mom. I gotta get off the Cardi B jokes. They have some nice back and forth, and she ends up making him clean bedpans, which he's less than enthused about after he offered medical expertise to her and put it at her disposal, which, I mean, she obviously knows he's a serial killer. He asks for a butterscotch candy, and she basically ignores him, which will come into play later on. Malcolm meets up with Gill and is attempting to profile the killer, and Jessica calls him and tries to get him to help with her sister, and he hangs up on her and takes a call from Ainsley, who is currently in the middle of a meltdown. Danny notices Malcolm is noticeably shaken due to the fact that Ainsley tells him she's leaving his apartment. She can't stay there anymore. She needs to get out. So Malcolm is freaking out. Danny picks up on this. As you can tell, Danny really cares about Malcolm, and it's more than just their coworkers. I think that they're leading towards a burgeoning romance between these two, maybe in a season or two when they're ready to put these two characters together. Danny and Bright are on the street talking on their way to the plastic surgeon's office, and they meet with two high-profile doctors at this private practice called the Lexington Collective, and you completely get the idea that they're both scumbags, one more so than the other, as he's kind of fiddling with this tiger on his desk, and it later comes into play that he stores his blow inside of it. So they have JT and Gill interrogate one of the more effeminate pair of plastic surgeons, and he points them towards another woman who might be part of the plot later, because that's what needs to happen. Bright goes to the lab to meet with Idrissa, and she's all dressed up like she's going on a date, literally, and thinks because she said it's a date earlier that it was actually a date. Malcolm breezes in and out, has her run some DNA samples from the blood he got off of Ainsley's clothes the night she showed up at his house, or she was waiting for him at his house, all bloody. So Idrissa is saying to herself, I think that went well, and there's obviously this growing love triangle between him, Danny, and Idrissa, and obviously it's going to be Danny. If it's not, I would be very surprised, but the weirdos on Tumblr and Twitter are hell-bent on it being Malcolm and Idrissa. Danny and Malcolm go to this swank-looking penthouse, and they knock on the door. They're greeted by a German-sounding doctor who, why do I say he's a doctor? Well, he answered the door and scrubs with some blood on him. Danny kicks the door in, handcuffs the man as Bright makes his way upstairs, happens upon what looks like a surgical setup, and it turns out The woman they were looking for, Francine, runs an at-home plastic surgery clinic out of her house. She says all the procedures are strictly pay to play. They're voluntary. The people want this done. They reveal her face, which is covered by a shroud, and she ends up looking like that Big Ange lady who died that was on Real Housewives of New Jersey. And I could seriously, I've watched some gross stuff on TV. I couldn't look at this woman's face. It was disgusting. Literally, the plastic surgery, the Botox, it looked disgusting. Martin is helping a patient in the infirmary and says he has a subdermal hematoma. Capshaw is kind of pissed because Martin was right about the diagnosis, but we'll get back to that later. Bright, Danny, and Gill are running the profile. Bright is told to go home to dinner. Jessica and Ainsley and Bertie are having dinner. Malcolm joins them, and there's a back and forth between the entire family. I'm not going to show any pictures here because I don't have any. Martin Whitley is assisting Dr. Capshaw in the infirmary, and he convinces her that the only way to save this patient who has the subdermal hematoma is to drill into the back of his skull, cut it open, and drain the blood out to reduce the swelling. And because he is dehydrated, long story short, she goes along with it. And there's really actually a funny moment where Capshaw says to Whitley, she goes, "If he dies," and Martin quickly responds with a smile and just says, "We'll just put it on my tab." It was a absolute great line by Michael Sheen. Capshaw's drilling into the back of the inmate's head, relieving the pressure under Whitley's assistance, and then she orders Whitley to be removed from the room when he kind of gives her an "I told you so." And you can tell there's some animosity, but also some underlying sexual tension there. Bright gets a call from Gill, and he has to leave his family dinner, which doesn't seem like it's going to be that big of an issue because his Aunt Bertie seems like a royal pain in the ass, and I hope this character doesn't become a staple on this show, because one of the evil psychiatrists is found dying, and Bright uses the other evil doctor's cocaine stash to concoct a formula to try and save the dying doctor, which he does much to the chagrin of Gill and Danny. So Bright injects it right into his heart, and he wakes up about, a couple seconds afterwards. This scene is basically reminiscent of the infamous Pulp Fiction adrenaline shot with Uma Thurman, John Travolta, and I believe it was Eric Stoltz. It was actually kind of cool, especially considering this doctor kept his cocaine inside of like a little, was it like a leopard or cheetah or something on his desk that Bright broke open. He's like, "The doctor's cocaine." It was just kind of a funny scene. Bertie is meeting someone at lunch, and Jessica shows up instead. Jessica calls her out on the fact that she is trying to sell a book about the family tragedy just for some money because she's broke and mom cut her off or something of the like. Jessica basically besmirches her by treating her like an idiot and buying her off and says, "You can keep the royalties from my memoirs because I'll do that so I can control the narrative." Gill, Danny, and Malcolm are hypothesizing about where the evil Dr. Donahue is as our rapscallion of a plastic surgeon has went on the lam. He hasn't been cheesed yet, though. And Malcolm figures out that Donahue is going to try to get a new face before he skips town. Now, where can one go to get a new face before they skip town? Francine's, of course. So they go right to Francine's house because this is the only place with an underground illegal plastic surgery clinic that's run out of somebody's condo. They find one of the surgeons unconscious by the door, blocking it as Gill and Danny make their entrance along with Bright, and they find the other doctor on the floor, and they figure out that it is this woman that was wronged by Dr. Donahue and the other guy he tried to kill that Malcolm shot cocaine into his heart. Yes, that happened earlier this episode. Where the hell have you been? Where have you been? So they have this standoff with this woman, and Bright's kind of goading her on, but he's goading her to let Donahue live as she's kind of carved his face up a little bit and, made him not as pretty as he'd want to be. So somebody who values physical and aesthetic beauty and perfection as much as him, letting him live like that is far worse than killing him, which Bright convinces her of. She surrenders to Danny and is immediately arrested. In a moment between Dr. Capshaw and Martin Whitley, after their patient has been treated, she tells him that he's doing fine, and she crosses the line and says, slips him a single butterscotch candy, which is a precursor of things to come in their developing relationship. Now, having a background in corrections and having studied that sort of thing, I know from a fact that what she just did will set up a pattern of behavior and events that is a very slippery slope for anyone who works in the criminal justice system, and that is befriending an inmate. Now, that is going to lead to her, I guarantee you, helping him in some nefarious circumstances, as this is more prevalent with prison guards than it is with doctors. But, they're obviously susceptible to it as well in our fictional world. But in reality, you see a lot of, and I say this not to not to seem sexist, but female corrections officers are more apt to be sympathetic towards the inmates' non-sexual gratification, whereas their male counterparts, if they're taking a shine to a particular female inmate, about 90% of the time it's for personal gratification, whereas the females tend to be more nurturing, and that leads to other things. But yeah, so this is kind of just the psychology behind this story arc, which I think is actually a pretty smart bit of writing on behalf of the show. So I didn't mind that at all, because I really like Martin Whitley. I love his character, even though he's an insane not insane, but he's a serial killer, a sociopath as it were, a narcissist. He's still a very compelling character, which speaks volumes to the writing and the acting and performance by Michael Sheen. Malcolm is talking to Ainsley, and he tells her that the blood on her shirt was pig's blood, and she tells him that she did it to get back at him for not telling her about the Endicott murder, and completely breaks him down. He's screaming at her. He says that I was trying to save you pain, and she responds with, that's exactly what Dad would say. And this scene is filled with tension, setting that up between Malcolm and Ainsley as they've kind of come together, but this was for him, like I said, kind of gaslighting her. She did not take kindly to that, nor does anybody who's been gaslit. We cut to Estonia and find Nicholas Endicott's head in a fishing net, and this inspector is on the case, and he's heading to New York to investigate the Endicott murder, and this is actor Alan Cummings, who will be making a guest appearance on the show, and I think this will add a little bit of spice into the forthcoming second half of season 2, which returns April 13th, and leads me into my final thoughts about this episode, that it's a shame because it was just on a 2-week break, and it really kills some of the momentum of the show that it had built through the previous episodes that hooked you in. The dynamic between Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Sheen was great, and it definitely looks as though we have a possible romantic situation between them, as I spoke to that point earlier. Plus, the Whitley family is going to be under investigation for their suspicion and involvement in the Endicott murder, inevitably. So that arc will play out whilst we get more from the weekly crime stories, as well as Martin's burgeoning prison romance with Dr. Capshaw, I'm sure, the dynamic between Malcolm, Danny, and Idrissa, the conflict between Ainsley and Malcolm in that growing situation. So they have a sufficient amount of story to tell, as long as they can stay away from the common pratfalls of Berlanti shows. This should remain as good as it's been overall thus far. Like I said, this episode, the villain was kind of lackadaisical in my opinion. Overall, 5 scale, I would probably give this one a 2.5 overall. It did set up some nice things. The episode was just a little bit, like I said, a little bit off kilter for me as far as the main antagonist went this episode. The wronged former plastic surgeon with an axe to grind against her former colleagues. It seemed like lazy writing, honestly, and I'm not going to edit this. It just seemed like lazy writing to me, as I'm kind of freestyling here at the end of the review. But I want to know what you guys think now. Let's take this thing home. So as I said, this episode is the last one we're going to get until April 13th. It's the winter break of the show, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it just came off a 2-week break, and here we are thrust into about a month and a half roughly with no episodes until they come back and round out season 2. So like I said, this leaves me, it's a 2.5 out of 5 on this one. Wasn't overall ecstatic about the episode. It did what it was supposed to do with the main plot, was move it forward. It's going to introduce Alan Cummings further in the ensuing episodes after we come back from the break, as we got him in that little ending scene there over in Estonia, where for some reason where they shipped the body, and he knew by the marks and the cuts that it was the body was killed elsewhere, and then sent to Estonia, as Malcolm did, which didn't understand why it was Estonia. I mean, Harold feed him to the pigs, so you never trust a man with a pig farm, but I don't know what's up with Estonia. Anyway, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to do all the YouTube things. You know the drill. I'm Untitled Chapter, the place to be reviews. I've been here with all of yous. And remember, if I don't see you, have a great day, a pleasant tomorrow, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Fade out.